Most people that carry wilderness first aid kits are prepared for the wrong injuries. Not because they're careless, because they learn medicine from Hollywood. And Hollywood's not real good at keeping people alive. Let's face it, outdoor recreation is up, but search and rescue calls are up. There's medical misinformation everywhere, including wilderness first responder manuals. It's not that people don't care, it's that they're confident in things that they've never even practiced. And as I've said, I've seen people carry gear they don't know how to use, while missing that one thing that could have prevented or minimalized the injury to start with. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most injuries in the wilderness don't start with drama, they start with boredom, fatigue, and familiar terrain, ending with one bad decision after another. It's not cliffs, it's not bears, it's not epic survival events. It's the mundane stuff. So since we're talking way past first aid, let's define wilderness medicine. Wilderness medicine is medical care that is delivered when separated from definitive care or hospital level care by either time, distance, or circumstance. Pre-hospital care or ambulance transport or something of that nature, getting from point A to point B, is usually done within what's called the golden hour. That's 60 minutes from the time the illness or injury happens until you get to the hospital. Any time in that is the ideal operating time to help somebody with definitive care. In wilderness medicine, however, we adapt our methodologies to go well beyond that, such as sitting on a patient for hours, days, maybe even weeks. We're well outside of the distance and certainly outside of the golden hour, which 95% of the US lives within an hour of definitive care, whether it's by ambulance or by personal vehicle driven to the hospital. So why should we even consider wilderness medicine? Well, think about it. Cell phone reception? I know I'm in a lot of places where there's no reception whatsoever. The inability to get from point A to point B in a timely fashion or even at all. So because of this, the treatment methodologies need to change based off of situation, location, and adaptive environment. What may be done at the house is not necessarily what's going to be done in the wilderness or the woods, on a hiking trail, or out in the mountains. The National Institute for Health actually expanded on the definition for wilderness medicine and said for it to be a wilderness medical event, it has to be a resource-poor environment, which means not enough people, no communication, no transportation, or even appropriate gear. Now, that is compared to street side, such as an ambulance or hospital. If you decide you're going to write anything down, make it be these three things. Understand the situation, think outside of the box, and improvise a solution. Those are the hallmarks of wilderness medicine. So let's get into some of the myths. Myth number one, I'm prepared because I've got a lot of gear. We've already been through this. How many people carry chest seals and tourniquets and decompression needles and other trauma tools they have no idea how to use? But the quick reality check of tourniquets especially is most wilderness medicine problems are not going to be solved with a tourniquet. And then there's the thing of making sure that you actually put it on, use it correctly. We've had that discussion as well, which means that using it incorrectly could probably lead to more of a problem than what you started with. And carrying gear when you don't know how to use it doesn't make you more prepared. It actually makes you slower because now you're carrying extra weight you don't need to. And if you're coming off a trail, you're just laden down with more and more stuff. Myth number two, wilderness injuries are dramatic. No, they're not. Most injuries don't happen during the sketchy part of a trip. That's not to say they won't or can't. It's to say that's not typically when they happen. They typically happen on the way out or off the trailhead, near camp, or on terrain that you're already familiar with. You've walked it 100 times. And why does this become a problem? Well, because people are tired. They're already fatigued. They've walked the trail, which means their attention's already dropped. Their decision-making power decays the tireder you get. And because of that, people stop actively managing risk. It means that familiarity is actually dangerous. If you look at the stats on wrecks or motor vehicle accidents, you'll find that a majority of them happen between 2 and 5 miles from home. Why? Because they smell the barn. And what that means is, hey, I know this road. I know this patch of road. I can get there with no issues whatsoever. I don't have anything to worry about. I'm tired, I just want to go home, sit down, and veg. And so your attention wanes to, what are you going to do when you get home? How am I going to spend the evening? I'm going to go take a shower. I'm going to go take a bath. I'm going to go to bed early. I'm going to go have a drink. But in wilderness medicine, you're not actually treating everything. You're treating three main priorities: airway and breathing, severe bleeding, and hypothermia, even when it's warm outside. We'll have another discussion on that at a different time. But those are your three main risks. And so you need to adjust your priorities to fit those specific things. And if it's not one of those things, it's usually not killing them right now. You do have time to get to definitive care. You do have time to treat, but those are the things that will kill immediately. And once you get that mindset change, that saves more lives than the gear that you carry all day long. So there's a simple action you can take, and that's chaos versus calm. This is a rule that a lot of people never hear. Calm fixes more patients than equipment. Calm slows down breathing. It also slows down bleeding. Calm prevents small problems from becoming evacuations. And if you're calm as the provider, it actually helps the patient become even more calm. Trust me, I've been there and done this a number of times, because panic creates more patients than anything. People start running around like a chicken with their head cut off. And the problem is that if they're bleeding, even slightly, panicking could induce faster movement of the heart and then could increase the blood pressure to start oozing out or spurting out, if the case may be. That's where you start looking at the need for evacuation versus, hey, we're just going to treat this. We're going to take things slow, take a deep breath. And I know that's hard. I know calming people are hard. And I know in a panic situation, it's harder for you to remain calm. But those are the things you have to practice. You have to learn them, and you have to continue to practice them. Again, you've heard me say it's not all about gear, and I don't care whether you carry gear or not, but make sure you know how to use it. Keep your mind on those three priorities: airway and breathing. Can they take a breath in? Can they take a breath out? It may be fast, it may be real slow, but are they breathing? That's number one priority. Number two, severe bleeding. If they're bleeding, deal with it. Put pressure on it if you need to. Make sure that, we're going from severe to a trickle or not even at all. But then if it's spurting or doing something we don't want it to do, that's time to use that tourniquet. That is a piece of gear that I do carry regardless. And the reason being is because if we get to that point, I need to use it, and I need to know how to use it very, very quickly. You need to manage those three killers, because even hypothermia, you need to manage that cold. You need to make sure that they're warmed up. Put on layers. Make sure they've got a jacket, a coat, a space blanket, a wool blanket, something. Give them your coat if that's something that you don't mind parting with. But keep in mind, that's one of those killers that you've got to deal with. Even though you can recognize those three priorities, you still need to deal with your own stuff, such as managing fatigue and boredom, like hazards, such as you going off the trailhead, or out the trailhead, if you will, coming off, going back to the vehicle, and saying, I'm complacent. I know where I am, no problem. Take that extra step, that extra breath, and that extra time, and slow down, even though it's familiar terrain. I've walked this trail, I can't tell you how many times, but I almost twisted my ankle earlier. As you're going, take a deep breath. Inhale, exhale, and go, okay, I'm gonna get there. I just need to take my time. I know I'm ready to get back to the vehicle, but this extra little second is not gonna hurt anything. In fact, it's probably gonna prevent hurt more than anything. And then lastly, practice staying calm before you start practicing those skills. Calm yourself down. If it's on you, go, you know what, crap, I gotta deal with it, and deal with it. If it's on somebody else, your calmness, your tone will help bring them way down to where they start managing the calm themselves. They'll match your energy, and you'll be able to deal with them a lot easier than somebody that's in panic mode. Because again, preparedness is decision making under stress, not shopping. As I said, most people don't fail in wilderness emergencies because they lack gear. They fail because they misunderstand risk, medicine, and human behavior. And if you fix that, you'll outperform 90% of those prepared people. So until then, use your instincts to survive.